You are listening to the Tiny Vet podcast, where I, the Tiny Vet, Dr. Nicole Sue, is currently watching my podcast co-host, Jez Watts, try and panic and think of a line at the very last minute.
We've got 3 buns in the room. A bird outside will be gone soon. Right?
Yes.
Somewhere to someone's house. Yeah,
yes, 100%.
Is that true?
Yes,
It's true. It's on the record.
Very true.
It's legally binding. Everything on the podcast is legally binding.
Yep.
Sorry, every mid-level comedian in the world. All right, yeah, go on. What are we talking about this week?
Oh, this is going to be hard for you.
No, I don't want a hard one. I want an easy one.
No, I'm sorry.
All right, let's go.
This is going to strike that chord, but all right, today's one.
The husbands of veterinarians suck. The episode.
And it is why, and this is really sad for me too, because I love wildlife, is why a lot of vets euthanize wildlife patients.
Aww.
Yeah, do you want to tell your little story, Jez?
Which story?
The one of the lizard.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is very early on in our
many
relationship.
years ago. I was a new graduate, so
Really?
that was like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, it might have been 8, I think. But
Yeah.
so it was very early on in our relationship, and I was still very new to stand-up. And I went to visit Nicole at her practice. Like, she was finishing up the day. She was doing it on campus, at the clinic on the campus. I was doing a gig on the campus at the campus bar. And so I showed up to the practice. It's almost, like pretty much after hours. She's like, "Oh, hey, come in. And can you hold this monitor lizard?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll hold the monitor lizard." And while she gives an injection, I think for medicine. And then she injects the monitor lizard. And then the monitor lizard, as I'm holding it, which is a pretty chunky animal, is dying. And then she says, "Oh, yeah, we're euthanizing the animal." And so I'm just feeling life end in my hand, which I wasn't expecting at all. And I'm not inured to this the way veterinarians are. I'm just a dumb comedian guy. And so I was just like, oh, death is confronting me. And then I had to go 10 minutes later and do a comedy set. And I was just like, hey, what do you guys think about death? Is that like... I bombed so hard. It was the worst gig. I've had a lot of bad gigs. That was one of the worst gigs I've ever had. And I think it was definitely something that we had a long conversation about it afterwards, where I was like, never do that to me again.
Yeah.
But it's something
genuinely my bad.
but it is something where
realize.
I think veterinarians, people in the medical profession, they just become used to that. You have to become used to it. I guess if you don't become used to it, you quit those jobs.
Or you kill yourself. And sometimes that happens anyway.
Sure.
So, it sucks.
Yeah. As long as you don't like make me hold your body while you do it.
Surprise. But yeah, so that I think was probably Jez's first introduction to, what happens with a lot of wildlife. And the reason why we had to euthanize that monitor lizard is that he had a fractured femur.
Okay.
So that was a life-ending injury for this lizard.
And did his racing career.
Yes. And that really was his life,
Sure.
So he just didn't have that reason to live without it. So it's really the kind of...
The Animal Olympics is the cutest Olympics.
Aww, the bunnies!
Oh, man. Bunnies are so bad at the spear toss. Their little nubs can't get a good grip.
They can't do it. The ears
They
get
have to
in
do
the
it with their mouth.
way. Oh, the ears would get in the way so much.
Sure. It's difficult.
But that is unfortunately the fate of a lot of wildlife patients that come into veterinary hospitals. And that's not because, we hate them or we're callous or we're uncaring. I hate it. It
Invasive
sucks.
species?
Invasive species as well.
Oh, man. That took a lot to wrap my head around.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's something where it feels... from outside of it almost feels malicious when you go, like, oh, what if I surrender this animal, you're going to kill it?
Yeah, and that's what the general public do. Like, you've seen a lot of, posts or something.
Sure.
Someone goes, oh, I found this bird. What do I do? And there's always going to be someone that goes, oh, don't bring it to a vet clinic. They'll kill it.
Sure.
And they don't understand why that's a common outcome.
Mm.
So first of all, if a wild animal can be caught by a human being, restrained, and then brought into a clinic, it is really, really sick.
Right.
Like, imagine how unwell they are for something that you normally just can't even get close to.
Right.
For someone to pick them up with their hands,
right,
put them in a car, and drive them to a clinic. They are sick to about to die.
Right.
So a lot of times we are just ensuring that the death isn't protracted.
Yeah.
And they don't suffer.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Jez spoke about invasive species. So we used to live in Western Australia in Perth, and the rainbow lorikeets there are a tremendous problem as an invasive species. They are native to the east coast of Australia, where we live now, in Melbourne, but they are not native to Western Australia. Now, the problem with that is that they are actually causing the decline of iconic Western Australian species. So our black cockatoos. Love them. Probably my favorite bird. Oh, no, tough competition. My favorite cockatoo, definitely.
Tradies that work in the mines. Iconic WA species.
Oh my god. Anyway, our black cockatoos in WA, they nest in old tree hollows.
Alcoholics. Sorry, go on. Yes.
And so do rainbow lorikeets. Now, even though rainbow lorikeets are smaller, they're gregarious, so they flock in huge, and they're aggressive. They're little assholes.
Right.
And they actually reduce the breeding rate of our black cockatoos. Which is why back in WA
what
we
does it mean
had
to reduce the breeding rate?
They can't find the nest hollows, or they get kicked out of the nest hollows, so they can't breed. Yeah, because the rainbow lorikeets are pushing them out.
Yeah, sure.
And that's why in WA it is the law that if a rainbow lorikeet run to a vet clinic, no matter what, you euthanize them.
Yeah, right.
You can sometimes get them to go to pet homes, and that's fine, but they're also not great pets.
Mm.
You know, there are people that have them as pets and they are successful, and that's great. But there are so many of them, and a lot of them are not the friendly talking bird that a lot of people want.
Yeah, okay.
And also a lot of the adults, they're not going to live well in captivity because they were born wild, they were raised wild, and that's not something that they're going to adapt to. So when you look at the net suffering and we look at the net benefit,
right,
that's why the law is there
to
euthanize them.
Sure.
So it sucks. It took me a while to come to terms with in the beginning, but also at the same time, I did a lot of work with the black cockatoos. We used to see them all the time when I was riding out on my horse. We had big flocks of them in the campus, and I fell in love with those birds, and that kind of was the impetus for me to go, you know what? This sucks, but I understand why.
Sure.
And while I don't like doing it, I'm okay doing it.
Mm.
So that's with the invasive species. And now the other thing as well that people forget about. I think a lot of people have a really Disneyfied version, if that makes sense, of wildlife. They think, oh, it's like Bambi, it's the happy family and all that. And they, all smile at the same time.
No, before I had to start living with a bunch of rabbits, I thought they all ate carrots exclusively.
Yeah, but...
Why wouldn't I think that? The only bunny I'd ever met was Bugs.
Bugs Bunny, yep. But wild animals... They can't stand up to intensive treatment. You can't hook up a wild animal to an IV line and expect it to stay in for, whatever the 14 days needs to stay in hospital, the constant handling, the barking dogs, the injections, the medication and all that, and still thrive.
Right.
You can't expect them to understand that in the end you're trying to help them.
Sure.
And also they need to be viable in the wild. There's no point.
Like if you hang on to a wild animal too long,
yes,
and it becomes like, used to humans and stuff. Like now, it's not going to survive.
Absolutely, but that's also why broken wings are a death sentence to many birds, because even if it doesn't set 100%, they're not going to fly properly, and they're going to get hit by cars. They're going to get eaten 2-3 days after they're released.
Sure.
So there's no point doing that, wasting resources on an animal that is probably going to suffer more and die anyway if you did that and release them. So what we're looking at is reducing the net suffering. We're looking at the big picture. Mm-hmm. Yes, we would always like to save every animal that comes in through the door. But we've also got to deal with the reality of the situation.
Right. And that's why I'm scheduled to be euthanized.
Oh, if only. The Tiny Vet Podcast is brought to you by Upilio. Sources for our topics can be found at upilio.io. Outro music by Matt Charleston.